Right, we're live with the latest edition of the eTourism Summit's See Tomorrow series, and I'm thrilled that we're able to keep this community together over the course of the year as we lead into September and a live in-person event in Las Vegas. So, there's never been a time where kind of critical thinking in travel and tourism has been more important. And our industry has been challenged like no other, and this recovery is going to be it's going to be exciting. It's going to be fun, but it's going to be a little bit of the wild, wild west. So I'm thrilled to have such amazing partners and sponsors of the Tourism Summit, and certainly one of the longest serving sponsors and partners of the Tourism Summit has been Madden Media, and another incredible partner through several iterations of career has been Matt Clement with Madden Media. So Matt, I want to thank you again for your continued support, for your thought leadership with the industry, and for all that you and the team at Madden do to help our destinations grow. So with that, I'm gonna turn the session over to you and an amazing panel with an exciting conversation.
Well, thanks so much, and it's great to be here and great to be live with everybody across the country, and I'm really excited about this particular conversation because we have three really brilliant veteran tourism leaders from I think three unique situations and destinations to share some thoughts today on destination intelligence, on data, on metrics, research, and just stuff in general, right? And so it's my pleasure to introduce them to you. First up, Kayleen Griffith, who's the president and CEO of Visit Bentonville. She's been the CEO at Visit Bentonville for nearly 16 years now. And a little bit of trivia that most people probably don't know about Kayleen is that previous to that, she was a YMCA executive director for 4 years. And so that's kind of an interesting thing to share with everybody. And then next up, we have Brett Stewart, who is president and CEO of Port Aransas Tourism Board and Chamber of Commerce, which is a unique setup. He's been there for just about a year and went to Port Aransas after a almost 16-year career as the president and CEO of the Great Rivers and Routes Tourism Bureau, and actually was the CEO as they rebranded to that particular brand from the Alton Bureau. So pretty interesting. And he's also, another fun fact here to share, was an adjunct professor at Lewis and Clark Community College. So I'll just refer to you as the professor. And then finally, last but not least, Matt Baroud, Marketing and Innovation Administrator, which might be the coolest title ever, with the Idaho Department of Commerce, which manages and runs the Visit Idaho brand. And he has been there for about 7 years now. So thank you, Kayleen, Brett, and Matt, for joining us. And let's just kick off here with just kind of a warm-up question, I think. And I think that's going to be an obvious question is how has the pandemic changed the guiding strategies for your destinations? And within the realm of that question, what keeps you up at night in terms of what has changed in the past year? So good warm-up question. Kayleen, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Welcome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to being on the panel with these gentlemen. Our strategy's always been data-driven, but I think COVID has made us drill down even further into that strategy so we can prioritize, what has that impact to ensure our limited dollars, because we did get our cut in the dollars and cents for us was huge for us. It's about a third of our budget. So we had to spend more wisely. So we had to drill down into the data and make sure that we were making strategic decisions as we were doing that. I think what keeps me up at night, and because I'm really passionate about our restaurants, our local restaurants, local hotels, and our local attractions, is that we're the home of Walmart. And Walmart is not going back to business in this corporate world. When does that happen? How can we make sure that we can get our restaurants, hotels, and our attractions to survive until they go back to work? Because that is a big part of our income, especially that Monday through Thursday.
Mm-hmm. Brett, how about in Port Aransas? What has changed and what keeps you up at night?
Well, the pandemic brought me here. So that's one thing that's changed. We actually went through 4 directors last year. So had the previous person who left and then had 2 interims fill in before I came on board here in August of last year. So that certainly has changed a lot in the pandemic, but more as what's going on here in the town of Port Aransas, and this ocean destination has really the fact that we saw an incredible year. So we saw last year at this time our numbers plummet like everybody else, but it wasn't a few weeks later that the beach became the place that everybody went to go. So our numbers have skyrocketed and continue to maintain that level of growth even as we go in through March. I'm looking at those numbers most recently. So we are really seeing exponential growth. A lot of that's fueled by the pandemic and the people getting aware of who we are, plus all the development that's going on in this lovely little island as a result of really Hurricane Harvey that came through a few years ago and wiped out a lot of the old stuff that's being replaced by so much new infrastructure. So it's a really exciting time. What keeps me up though is how are we going to maintain this moving forward? Talking to my board, we're having a great year. The metrics are phenomenal. There's work shortages, of course, everywhere, but how do we keep up with the demand and how do we keep that demand high? So hopefully it goes on beyond this pandemic phenomenon, but time will tell.
And Matt, how about from a state perspective?
Matt, it's been interesting in Idaho. I mean, I think we share some of the same sentiment as Kayleen and Brett have mentioned. Somebody much smarter than me a few months ago had kind of described this situation through the pandemic as we're experiencing the same storm in different boats. And I think that's been really true for us in Idaho. We've had a very a good year at a high level, but not all of our communities, not all of our regions, certainly not all of our businesses are having these record years as others in the state are. And so, interestingly enough, the pandemic really played to our strengths. We're an outdoor recreation mecca. People wanted to get outside. Idaho's a great place for that. Rural destinations, lower population, largely a drive market. So we were, at a high level, maybe even impacted a bit positively. So it's been very interesting to see those varied experiences though across our state. And then from a state perspective, how do we drive a strategy and execute on something that helps benefit everyone, knowing that everyone is having, many of our communities, all of our regions are having just very different needs, seeing different traveler trends, all of that. How do we stay on top of that and make sure we're providing the resources and the leadership for our communities and our businesses across our state? From a budget perspective, we've been pretty steady. But in terms of what keeps me up at night, trying to stay, one step in front of, maybe how the pandemic is affecting traveler and visitor behavior. How are we going to continue to adapt and try to be out there, anticipating what may be occurring? Because I don't think we're going to be, I think that reset button has been pushed. We're not going to go back to, well, we'll just, relaunch our strategy in 2019 and pick up from where we left off. Those days are done. And so we've got a whole new set of visitor trends and a whole new set of comp sets and different things people are looking for. And it's that type of stuff. How do we stay ahead of it that we're really focused on?
Well, let me ask you guys one kind of not necessarily a follow-up question, but talking about how things have changed in the pandemic, and then we'll jump into talking about destination intelligence. I'm curious to get each of your thoughts on whether or not day trippers will matter in 2022, because I feel like that's something I hear a lot around the country, is that day trippers, feet in streets, has become almost as important for a lot of folks as heads in beds. So I'm curious from each of your perspectives, will day trippers matter in your strategies in 2022? Or do you think that's a fad that will fade away with the pandemic?
So I can start. Day trippers for us are definitely a part and important piece, but they're not the piece we're going to go after. We're such a limited island with limited space that we have. Our market has evolved to a very expensive high-end market on some levels, and those are the ones we're going to continue to cater to. Those coming in just for the day trip are typically just going to our beaches, maybe RVing on the beach, camping on the beach, and they're not leaving as much money in our destinations. So from my job as an economic development expert is to get those dollars in here, and we're going to have to target a little bit higher than the day trippers.
Kayleen, how about in Bentonville?
Sure. I think for us, it's a priority for both because we collect the 2% on our hotels and lodging, but we also collect 1% on our restaurants and dining locations. And so we value those day trippers because they are going to eat here at least 1 or 2 meals while they're here. It's not as much as that overnighter. So we do have a mix of that. We've also, because of COVID, our team really was vested in working with our hotels and our restaurants to keep them open during that time. So we really created this relationship with them, probably stronger than it was prior to COVID. We had a strong relationship, but I think it went to the next level. And so I do think that for us, it's just as important, or not quite as important, but still important to our strategies as we move forward. We also know that some of our local events are really our drive-in markets that will come in for maybe a day for some of our larger events that we're starting to bring in. So I do think they're part of our messaging. It might not be the top line for us, but we don't want to forget them, and we want to keep them involved in what's going on in our community.
Thanks for that. Let's talk about destination intelligence and really the subject of the day. And this is a buzzword, I think, in a lot of ways that really has come about in just the last year or so. And, it's an interesting thing because I talking to DMO leaders all over the country, it really means different things to different folks and exactly, how they define it and what it means to them. So from each of your unique perspectives, what does destination intelligence mean to you? And is it something that you feel that, going forward, is it something that's budgetable? We've historically budgeted research, but destination intelligence doesn't necessarily, as a word, fit neatly with traditional ideas of research budgeting. So what's it mean to each of you? And is it something that you're budgeting for?
Yeah, I'm happy to start there. I think this is a really fun topic. This is something I'm really interested in everybody's perspective on. I think first of all, to us, destination intelligence, it means we have a solid read on ourselves. It means we have a solid understanding of what we're doing, what we're executing. You live by you manage what you measure, and so I like having a real-time read on the return and impacts of our programs, various program actions, media attribution, all those different things, and then really trying to understand even the control audiences or things like that, to where we can see what are the behaviors of those who have not been exposed or have not seen what we're talking about, and are we missing opportunities there? And so I really first of all read it as a look at inward, but then it then sets us up, I think, when we talk about the geographic nature of our state, the diversity of the state, having good intelligence and a good read on the various needs of communities across our state. North Idaho is a very different place from Eastern Idaho, and so that helps us better understand our product, visitor nuances by geography, and it helps us better work with our local and regional DMOs. Then it sets us up also to be kind of a go-to key contributor for industry support. We talked a little bit before we started recording. Kayleen talked about tourism, second largest industry in Arkansas. We talk about travel and tourism being the third largest industry in Idaho, and so this sets us up with some of those facts and some figures that we can utilize to help advocate for our industry and help advocate for our partnership. So it really does roll up into a lot of key areas for us.
Kayleen, do you want to go next?
Sure. A lot of what Matt said is exactly what I had. And I think one of the things for me, destination intelligence allows me to tell our story better, which then allows me to get a buy-in from our community leaders, our state leaders, which I think to me is the most important thing for us as we continue to grow and having to educate our legislators on the importance of tourism. So I do feel, my almost word for word, what Matt said earlier is what I had noted. And I really want to make sure, though, for me, it's really about getting that buy-in. And when I've I think when I've been more successful is when I have a legislator understanding our role that is calling me, asking me for that data or that data, however you want to say it. But getting that information to them, and then they utilize it. So they're utilizing it when they're speaking to people. And I think that is how we can continue to succeed in our industry, if we can get that buy-in and giving them the data that they need.
Sure. And Brett, how about you?
Yeah, the only thing I can add additional, if it's even additional or not, is, so many years we were all about, content is king. And, I forgot, was it Bill Gates who coined it or one of them? Now we're looking more as how the data democracy is really revolutionizing marketing and destinations. So it really is watching the data that comes in and really using that as your, all the decisions, what content to put forward, how to say the content, how to present it, and what does that mean from the voice of your destination and those visiting your destination. So that intelligence we gather, only gives us that much more power to reach the right person we want on the stand with us at the time we want them. So that's all I can add.
Well, so let me ask you all this question then. I think everybody agrees that we're in an era right now of kind of a golden age where we're all getting lots of phone calls from different data providers. I mean, compared to even just 5 or 10 years ago, that the sheer volume of providers and types of information that we can subscribe to has just really blown up. And so as three leadership figures in each of your destinations, how are you evaluating these different data sources and providers and types of research products that are out there? And how has that changed in the pandemic, or has it changed for you? And what influences you most in terms of the type of information that you're interested in? Is that, is it local politics or performance objectives? So Kayleen, I'll toss it back to you first, if you'd like to.
Sure. I'm going to probably answer a little bit of this, and then if I forgot something, you're going to have to pull it out, because there were a lot of questions in there, Matt.
Yeah. Well, let me simplify there. Not doing a very good host job here. So tell us first, how do you evaluate a piece of, if a provider calls you up and says, hey, I've got some information or data or research, how do you evaluate it, and what influences you most in what you decide is important to you?
Sure. So because all of us are getting contacted with lots of providers. I think one of the things that's easiest for me is prior to this year, we were going to multiple sources, and it was financially a lot of different options for us that we're trying to pull it all in. And then I'm trying to gather that information and make sure what do our commissioners want to see, what does our city leaders want to see, and trying to pick and choose. And I'm having to pick and choose what they want to see rather than kind of finding out more about what they want to see. So we were trying to figure out, how do we have one source that we can go to, something that get all the data that we need to tell the story, so that we can pick and choose, that they can see it all and I don't have to pick and choose, allowing them to be part of that messaging. I think the big thing for us that data that can give us that travel sentiment is a huge right now. And I think Matt brought it up earlier, that the traveler's different than it was a year ago. And how do we keep understanding that? And how do we keep getting that information on a regular basis? It can't be, how's it going today? Because it's going to change from month to month to month until probably for another year or two, maybe even 3 years, as we get through this pandemic. So I do think that for us, it's really about, how do we gather that? How do we understand the travel sentiment? And then how do we use that data to best tell our story through marketing and advertising, through that, how are we measuring that, all along those ways. But it's getting that data, but then also figuring out how to use it. That's really important to me. But how do I get it in one, rather than having to go to, I'm going to 6 different sites and information, pulling the things I need to, and making it easy, accessible to our leaders in our community.
So Matt, or actually Matt or Brett, what types of information or measurements, especially now in this sort of pandemic era, coming out into the recovery, what has risen to the forefront for you guys in terms of the types of information that's most important?
It's it's certainly changed quite a bit. I mean, I think you know, when we look at some of the mobility data that we've been able to understand, I mean, I think especially when we were coming out of maybe some stay-at-home orders, or travelers weren't quite sure if they were ready, or and just kind of understanding, hey, are we seeing some movement, and are we able to identify where maybe some of that movement is occurring, where are the origin markets, being able to share some of that information beyond just our tourism community, but with business leaders across various industries, across a lot of folks were coming to us, hearing, hey, we heard you guys have some, you have some info, you have some data there. We might be able to better understand. So I think some of that mobility data has been really helpful. I think, as kind of Brett had mentioned a little bit earlier too. I mean, it's day trippers are still going to be very important to us, but overnight visitation is going to be really helpful. And so where we can see some sense of around, booking windows, and are we still in really short condensed windows, or are we starting to see some of that planning normalize a little bit, back to kind of where we were before? That's pretty helpful for a lot of our partners as well. But I think from our strategy perspective, we think basic strategy first, kind of a minimally viable product first, and then let's test, let's measure, let's look at the data, let's see how it's going, and then maybe we can drive deeper into some more depth around strategy there. But there's so much information, I think, as Kayleen had said. I mean, like we are contacted regularly, and so we really do lean on Madden, and we lean on our partners to help us see a holistic picture, really across the spectrum. And when we do find partners that add something new or something different, or that's a competitive advantage, or an area where we have a blind spot, then we're more than happy to engage there. But it's almost a paradox of choice at some point in time. It's too much, and I like the simplicity as well, as Kayleen had said. How do we simplify this?
Sure.
I think that's where I'd add in too, and not to repeat anything that you've said, Matt, but there's so many rabbit holes that we can climb down into with this research. I mean, there were still, when I count the number of people here, and now after the pandemic, we're still down 1 or 2 folks. So we have 7 full-time staff here. That's not enough to dedicate the market research. We run a chamber, we run a welcome center, and we run the bureau. So all 3 of those things are happening simultaneously. The research, the comprehensiveness nature that we need has been helpful to get as a priority, but then to triangulate, to overlay those research layers, your STAR reports, your AirDNA, your Uber reports on visitation, and all the things you do to help us kind of see at a glance what we can do. And then really, like Kayleen said, articulating that. So what is it we need to say to our legislators, our stakeholders, about who we are and what we're seeing right now? And having a team-based approach on that has been invaluable.
Before we kind of get into discussing a little bit of the individual situations, we've got some really, I think, neat, almost you could say case study questions to share with the audience today. But before we get to that, let's talk about, kind of in the subject or the summary of today's session. We talked about, metrics are not strategy. And I'm curious, as leaders, when you're thinking about the different metrics that you pay attention to, what comes first in your mind? Is it needing a specific measurement for organizational performance? Does that lead the conversation? Is it a strategy that you want to implement that then leads to you figuring out what metrics you need to measure it? I'm just kind of curious, like, how do you guys as leaders approach metrics and strategy and that decision making? Brett, do you want to kick us off on that?
Yeah, that's such a big question. Oof. But yes, so all the metrics are important, but how do we single out and choose? It almost becomes a flavor of the day, but you've got to stay consistent on really focusing on the metrics. So what was the question again, Matt? I think it was definitely
with regards to strategy and measurement. What comes first in you guys' mind? I think that's a more simple way to put it. What's first, strategy or measurement in your mind?
strategy, what we're trying to do, how we're going to get there, how we're going to move that needle, is what we need to be thinking of, big picture, and then the metrics to support that, hopefully. And if they don't evolve and change, and that's what we do all the time. We serve up ads we don't like, they're not performing, we're going to shift them. Or this month we're looking at link to stay versus signing up for an e-newsletter versus whatever it might be. So it really is looking at all of those things comprehensively and choosing the one right for the individual moment. So don't know if I answered that, but I'll pass the torch on to the next person, baton.
Well, and Brett said it well. You did a great job. But I would say that we even take it one step further with our strategy is we work really closely with our community organizations and community leaders and community attractions and businesses and saying, hey, what are you looking for? What are the performances that you're looking for? What are your outcome results? And then we bring that back and say, okay, how can we get those things and get that information to them so that they can even make better decisions as they move forward. So then there becomes, and I'll probably say this again, there's a value to our organization for them when we provide that information to them. So we even take it is a strategy, and I mean, every single day, but those measurements and those metrics are key to our strategy on a decision making from, Brett mentioned just a few of those. Every decision we make, we try to use that metric in some way, or we try to find a way to measure that so that we can go back and be a better partner, be a better organization, and then make the right decisions so that we're all more successful.
I did forget to mention, Kayleen, the destination development component of what you're talking about. That metric in and of itself is much different than a marketing strategy. So really is getting that true vision for where you want to go as a destination and going there. So thank you for.
Yeah, that's all really well said. I don't know that I have much to add. I mean, we start with strategy as well. It doesn't have to be a fully baked idea. We like getting something out there and testing and measuring it, and with all these different tools that we can use. It's so much more advanced than it's ever been. And working with our partners, no question, understanding what's important in those regions, what's important to those local stakeholders. And I think as Brett had said too, we kind of set out with a few, maybe annual or multi-year kind of larger goals. We're always looking at our shoulder seasons. So that's kind of a consistent, strategy that we're always looking at improving some of those off-peak months or off-peak destinations. And so, utilizing a lot of this data in more of an ongoing basis for some of those bigger strategic initiatives is very, very important for us, and the whole ecosystem of communicating to those stakeholders and bringing everybody together for some of those things where we can rally around some of these numbers to get us started has been successful for us in a lot of ways.
Well, thanks for that, everyone. And let's just jump into some of the sort of case study section of today's webinar, and we'll start with you, Brett, and Port Aransas. As you had mentioned, Port Aransas is a pretty unique destination in that you're a very small geographic footprint. You're an island just off the coast there from Corpus Christi, Texas. And you guys have really blown up. And as you mentioned, in recent years, you kind of went from being a hidden gem to, a really, really hot destination. So within that realm of that, what are the biggest challenges right now facing Port Aransas as a destination? You and I, in some of the pre-session talk, you mentioned the pandemic affecting the mix of visitors. You used to have a huge snowbird RVer population that came down. Now you have more families coming in. So, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing right now in Port Aransas as you go forward?
So we're really growing as a destination and evolving. So that evolution and that change, whether it's from hurricane to pandemic to economy to whatever, that we're changing. Every minute of the day, our demographic changes, our landscape changes. We're seeing things. What used to be a sleepy little fishing town has turned into a robust, destination, and will continue to evolve. So the challenge for us, again, going back to that destination development, is where and how and what do we want to do to work collectively to ensure that this 18-mile stretch of beaches are developed in a way that makes sense and really sustainable as well. I'll throw that word in there, but really is there, and that audience shift is happening. So we did see, luckily this year we didn't see the ton of spring breakers. We're not a spring break market. We don't want to see them. We saw a few hundred versus a few thousand. But what replaced them, our numbers didn't go down. Our numbers went up this March. And that was because we saw families, we saw strollers, we saw the right mix of folks here in Port Aransas to stay with us during the time, and they spent a lot more money. So we saw all of our numbers and sales receipts are through the roof. So I think I answered the question, but yeah, it's the evolution of this destination that is the biggest challenge.
How is the marketing strategy for Port Aransas, having this knowledge of the changing demographic, the changing nature of the destination? How is that compared to when you first got to Port Aransas? How has the marketing strategy changed from what's been in place historically?
So, we had a hurricane a few years ago that wiped everything out, just about. Weren't even working on a server when I walked in here. So we have found bits and pieces of our intellectual, market research, but really had to start from scratch on a lot of these things, looking at who our audience is and basing it on, real-time synopsis of competitor intelligence, even, looking at what are our other beach destinations, not only doing here in Texas, because while the big feeder markets for us are Dallas and Houston and Austin and San Antonio, we know that a large portion of those folks also go to Destin and to Orange Beach and to looking over in the Florida beaches, so the competitive intelligence piece to know the folks from Houston, how they're planning their trips to here, when they come here, how long they're staying, is vital. And us being able to layer all that research in now is it's priceless. So we're going to continue to evolve budget accordingly to ensure that our intelligence and strategies stay on market. Did I answer your question, Matt?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And I know one of the things that you have started to pay an awful lot of attention to as Port Aransas becomes a much bigger profile destination is expanding your definition of who your competitive set is. Historically, it had been Galveston, Corpus, and maybe South Padre. But you've started to compile some pretty neat information on competing destinations, looking at, paid media activity, and even, folks going to some of these competing destinations in Florida, Alabama. How can you give us a little bit of insight into what you're doing there and how that has also influenced your, worldview, I guess, of who you're competing with?
So we definitely, the Alabama beaches, the Florida beaches, looking at those as a comp set for us. We really found through this research that we have a bigger window of opportunity. So we know when people are coming to Port Aransas, they come to us once or twice a year from those markets, primarily within Dallas or within Texas. And what we can do now is continue to try to reach them at times when they're choosing the big summer beach destinations, but we're already full as an island. Our importance is going to be looking at that fall and spring set and to continue to grow that, because we know that they'll make maybe the shorter trip, but not the big beach vacation. But we can have those folks come out and stay and play with us at a time there. And Oklahoma is actually trending very well for our destination as well. Looking at Oklahoma City, for instance, as a key feeder market, that some of that stuff didn't pop up as much until we just most recently did this round of data and really looking at making smart decisions. We can spend all the money in the world to try to fight against a market where we're already saturated in, but we can find our little niche. And we are different than Galveston. We are different than South Padre. We have a much different experience, and us continuing to develop and define that visitor experience is what will help us succeed to where we want to be.
So let me ask you, what I've learned about some of the things that you pay attention to in terms of the types of information that you like to collect. There's some things that I haven't heard of really a DMO leader paying attention to before. And so I was hoping you could share, what are some of the more uncommon sources of information that you're paying attention to? Obviously, you're not just a tourism bureau, you're also a part, of the Chamber of Commerce. So what are some of the other forms of information you're looking at, and why are those important to you?
We do. We track a lot of what we call economic indicators and successes for us. Anything from sales tax to we have two ways on the island, right? We have a causeway bridge on one end, and we have a ferry that brings you on the north end. So we actually track ferry data on a monthly basis, and it's a very good analysis of what we might expect from hotel spends or even to our budget. Looking at, oh, okay, so they had this many compared to last year. We should probably correlate. It's not a great guess, but it gives us the ability to estimate on future budgets that haven't hit our bank accounts yet, so that we know we're going to be okay. We can breathe a little bit deeper. We can plan ahead. We can continue to move forward. So, home construction, that matters when we're looking here. I talk to our realtors on a daily basis, and I think already this year we're 300% above where we were last year, and that was pre-pandemic. So the real estate market down here is incredible. The growth, the sheer amount of new people that are coming into this destination or even the state of Texas is really changing the landscape so fast that we are using every piece that we can kind of monitor to do that. Even we're watching home builds, number of new home builds, anything like a normal chamber might watch. We're also watching, even though we're a chamber, we're really a tourism bureau that calls ourselves a chamber because we're in a tourism town of about 3,500 people.
Well, thanks for sharing all of that, Brett. And switching over to Bentonville and Kayleen. So you are the CEO of a destination that has undergone an awful lot of change in 15 years. From kind of a really beautiful, sleepy town up in Northwest Arkansas that just happened to be the home of the world's biggest company to really a bustling, rapidly growing national level destination with some pretty big attractions like Crystal Bridges Art Museum. A lot of people don't know that that's, a $2 billion plus endowed art museum that you've got up there, Kayleen. But what are your biggest challenges, as someone managing all of this growth that's happening so rapidly?
Sure. Yeah. And, growth and development hasn't stopped. I mean, during COVID, it did not stop for us. And there's some big announcements the last few months. There's the expansion at Crystal Bridges. There's more trails being built. It's continuing to grow. And, with COVID, and the pandemic, we're down $1 million, and that's about a third of our budget, and a little bit more than that, but right around that. And so our biggest challenge right now is figuring out how do we do more with less, and how do we make that work for us? So, our team, we have more with less dollars, but we also had to cut some of our staff at that point. And so it was a big impact for us. So our challenges were being very organized, strategized, and I think I've said this before, really looking at the data and making great decisions and being able to financially look at how do we lift that up from our challenges. But I do think our team has had to learn how to partner with folks and work with folks and keep up with the growth and development through this. And it has been a challenge, and it continues to be a challenge. I just said, they asked me about something this morning with our staff, and I said, okay, we don't have the dollars, but I think we're going to be okay. We'll make it work. And it's just trying to figure out but it was a good investment for us. So we're going to figure out how we make that work so that we can spend the dollars to make it work. Or we go back and negotiate to say, we have this many dollars. What can we do with that many dollars and still get some of the same results? And that's really our biggest challenge, is dollars and cents, and then keeping up with that development and those growth that we're having. Things have slowed down for us from a corporate side, but from a leisure side. And as you said, 10 years ago, we were a pass-through destination. We were lucky if we got a meal out of somebody. Now it's multiple days. And so it's our environment has changed in the last 10 years. So, and it's a fun environment to be changing too, for sure. But it's one of those things that having to keep up with it. And people forget we're a town of 50,000, and I only have 2,000 rooms that I'm getting 2% on. And we have only 1% on restaurants. We still have a nice budget there, but it's not compared to, and we're still the home of Walmart. So people think that we have more dollars because we're the home of Walmart, and we still have a limited dollar amount. So our challenge is figuring out how do we do that. And I know you're going to ask me some other questions, so I can't go into more details on that, but that's kind of where that direction is, that how do we make that work and be successful at it?
Sure. Well, I know that, when you first started really paying attention to location data, you were one of the first folks that came on board, actually the first city destination that came on board with Madden's Voyage platform. And, one of the first things that you looked at that really caught your attention was looking at folks going to your mountain biking trails. A lot of people, again, don't know this, but Bentonville is a world-class mountain biking destination now. And a lot of that development was really in large part to some local groups. There's some Walmart, Walton family investments there that helped. But, one of the challenges that you had pointed out that you had is that, okay, I've got this world-class mountain biking destination, but I only have so much funding. So I can reach to Kansas City and Little Rock and some of these regional places that I can go to. I don't have the budget to go to Denver, Austin, or Houston, these places where I see visitation coming in. So tell us a little bit about, okay, I see this data telling me I have people coming in. What do I do about it?
Well, I think, and this is where I'm going to go into this. This is huge for us, and this started early on for me. As I realized when I started, I had like a $500,000 budget to advertise and build, our budget, people to come into our community. And we just had a limited dollar amount. So being from the YMCA and the nonprofit world, I was like, well, why are we not partnering with people? Why are we not figuring out? So our big thing is that we step back and we look at what our strategy is and we say, okay, where can we partner to get dollars and cents to help market those kind of initiatives? We can't do it by ourselves. We have a small budget. We cannot do that by ourselves. So we look at it and we go back in and we say, okay, how do I go to them with the data and get that information for them so that they're going to say, oh, we should be advertising because Austin is bringing this many people here and they're staying for this many days. And then I get a buy-in from the folks at the Runway Group, which that is the Walton family, the third generation's investment company that is building a lot of our trails, but they're also investing in arts and aviation and culinary. And so all these things that, when they're investing in them, that's crazy that we're not looking at them as opportunities from a tourism standpoint. So how do we go to them and say, what are your top priorities? Here's what our top priorities are. How can we be collaborating rather than us doing two campaigns? Let's campaign together. Let's promote those things together. And, how do we move forward as a partnership? And so I think for us, it's about taking the vision of multiple people and we work together. And I've been on other talks and talking about every Monday morning, I meet with our mayor, our chamber president, myself, our downtown association, somebody from Crystal Bridges, somebody from Walmart, somebody from the Walton Family Foundation. Every Monday at 10 o'clock, I've been doing it for 15 years. I'm the longest person here so far in our community that's sitting at those meetings. And it is how we communicate. I get to hear what the visions are going on from each one of those every single week, how we meet, what's going on, and then we figure out ways to collaborate. So they might be bringing something to the table. I will make a note of it. I'll come back. My team will say to them, hey, we should be working together on this. We can help this amount of dollars. What can you put in? So we continue to do that. And we look at some of the unique things like aviation. We have a small municipal airport, but it is a unique kind of airport. They have this phenomenal dining experience. It's right off a small lake. It's right off an amphitheater. They have pickleball. They have archery there. You're flying over to land in our municipal airport. It has a flight school there. It has a museum, an aviation museum there. It's a destination in itself. It's not just a flying in and park and go experience our community. They get an experience right then and there, but then they can get in the car and go somewhere else. So how do I take that information? How do I target those private pilots? How do I target that? And, Voyage and some of the things that we're working on with Madden Media, from a marketing standpoint and from a data collecting standpoint, how do we continue to build on that? And then I can sell it to them, because if we want to do a bigger partnership and campaign, I can bring them to the table.
And specific to that airport FBO, which for those that are not aviation savvy, that's a fixed-based operator. So you have your airports where Delta and American fly into, but these fixed-based operators are essentially where the private jets fly into and those private terminals. And I was really, I thought this was pretty neat. Your idea was to actually use geolocation data to look at, and this is something Brett's also doing, using geolocation data to actually see people going to, in your case, fixed-based operators around the country and figuring out how you might conquest some of those audiences. And Brett, you're doing the same thing with regards to seeing, people going to Destin or to Gulf Shores. So that's pretty cool, I think. And do you feel that type of, that's a neat way of using data and information. So is that something that you both feel like is going to become a pretty staple thing, a part of your strategies?
Yeah, I think if we can get, and I kind of like, for me, and Matt's going to love this, I'm going to steal some of people that fly into Idaho, because that's a big aviation destination. So I'm going to be saying, how do we get those folks in Idaho to fly into Bentonville? But we'll talk about Idaho because we think it's beautiful and it's got the wonderful outdoors, just similar to what Arkansas has. So, but I think that's, for me, is you're getting true real life data that you can utilize to help market and get to that area. How can you beat having that real life data? I mean, you're not guessing, you're not estimating, you're targeting the people that you need to target in that area of niche market. It's a no-brainer for me. And I think only, it's trying to figure out, how do we do it and how do we financially continue to do it? Matt, you and I talk about it often, is how do we financially continue to do that? And how can I do it in multiple destinations? And which is the best destination, figuring all that out. So I go ahead, Brett.
And I was just gonna say, that's the key right now, is this is the first time in my lifetime as serving, is that this data has been that affordable, right? It's never been at a price point where any of us small destinations could even touch it with a 10-foot pole. So now that's becoming affordable. We have a short window, though, I fear, and that window is going to be privacy and a lot of these other things coming down. So we need to do what we can do now to know who our market is, and to build that market internally, have our own voices and our own toolkits to then be able to reach them in years to come. So I know that'll change, and crystal ball doesn't tell me exactly what to think, but I know privacy is coming, and the ability for us to do what we're doing is short-lived. So we've got to ride the wave while we can and garner from it what we can.
I agree. That's very true, Brett.
Kayleen, a closing question for you is that you, as you just mentioned, you spend a lot of time talking to a lot of folks in the community, chamber, all sort of organizations. I'm curious, what are the types of information that resonate the most with them? What is the data points? And if you can give us specifics, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
But what resonates to them? We know what resonates to us, but what resonates?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we're using Voyage, and as somebody said, I brought all of our local leaders together. Matt did a great job for us and did a Zoom meeting to kind of educate them on our data that we're collecting and showing. What I found afterwards is the numerous emails, and Matt gets a chuckle out of this. One of them said, "We're ready to use this as a weapon." And it's one of our companies that we work with that manages our hospitality folks, but also does development. So it's one of those companies that has kind of one in hand. They want to use it as a weapon. They want to use it as their recruiting tool. They want to use it as what's going on in the community. So for me, they're looking at, where are people coming from? Number one, how long are they staying? Those are some of the key things. Our hotels are wanting to know that, the star report, and the Airbnbs are wanting to know their air DNA. And, we get that information and we share that monthly. So that is something that they're going to continue to see. For us, really, Voyage has given us that one-stop shop for them. So many of them weren't even aware of the data that was available to them. And I think that has been surprising and shocking to me, is a lot of these people have been in our industry from an attraction perspective or a hotel perspective, didn't even know that this information was available to them. We would be reporting on it monthly for I would say 10 years. My first 5 was probably just figuring out what data we needed at that point. And everything we did the first couple of years when I came in, I'd say, where did we get this number? And somebody goes, oh, somebody just said it. So we never had anything to back up our numbers. So that was one of my biggest challenges, telling our reporters, we don't have anything to back that number up, so I'm not going to use that number anymore. But trying to get to that level, now it's everybody wants everything. I mean, Matt, you and I have talked multiple times. They want to be able to sign in to that software on a regular basis and get it without even coming to us, trying to figure out what do they need, how do they need it, what we can share with them, and what we can do to continue to work together. So this data is benefiting every business in the community. They see it as a value. They love it. And the reason most important to me is, as I grow in it, and I'll call Matt and say, I want to do this. He's like, well, this is how much it's going to cost. Well, if I can get their buy-in to it, I can also get their dollars to help invest in our data, and so that we can continue to grow to have more value to it.
Thanks, Kayleen. And let's pivot over to a state perspective here with Matt. Matt, you guys have been doing an awful lot of work through the pandemic to keep all of your state partners across the state informed. How have you guys, can you just explain a little bit about how you have utilized some of your own destination intelligence resources during the pandemic and keeping your partners all over the state informed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we figured out pretty early on, over a year ago, that it was going to be really important that we kept in touch with all of our partners. When everybody was trying to figure out which way was up, we wanted to be the organization that was bringing our industry together. And like Brett had mentioned, is kind of talks about the Port Aransas organization. A lot of our partners are in similar organizations, chamber, CBB organizations that kind of fill that dual role. And so that's bringing everybody together. We do weekly webinars with our stakeholders across the country, or I'm sorry, across the state. That we stopped in the summer months when everybody's crazy busy, but picked back up in the fall, and have been doing through the spring as well. And utilizing whether it's the data that we see in Voyage, or the varying contributing partners who are some of the sources for a lot of this data. Everybody's been incredibly welcoming and incredibly willing to jump on with us for 30 minutes or whatever it is to talk through this. And it's just been really helpful for, I think, for all of those partners, as Kayleen had kind of mentioned. People then get a sense of what's going on in their community. They can report back to their businesses, and just knowing that, hey, every week I'm going to have this webinar for this, to discuss a topic related to this. We provide everybody access to our Madden Voyage account. I think we've got like 150 logins or something along those lines. And so, everybody can pop in there when they want to. But really just bringing some of this data to the forefront for folks to be hearing about it regularly, and then being able to access it themselves, and be thinking about that as they're working through their recovery, and as we all kind of contribute to that.
What are some of the pieces of information that you're sharing? You guys did what you call an iCourt recovery dashboard that you're sharing all over the state. What are some of the types of information that you're sharing there, and what's been the response from your partners around the state?
Yeah, I think when Brett was kind of touching on some of the different areas, maybe outside of conventional tourism metrics, that's really sort of what we rallied around with some of our recovery dashboard via our governor's conference. Working with a great partner out of Portland, Pragio Group, helped us coordinate some strategic planning with, we've called them super regions, so where we're combining a couple of our regions in the state to work a little bit more closely together. And they've coined the term, wind socks. So, you can kind of tell which way the wind is blowing. And that's everything from, some of our mobility data, some of the different things we're collecting that way, but also other tax revenue sources, other more localized pieces of data that those super regions are then reporting back to us on. We're kind of combining some of our Voyage data. So when you do get into some of the economic development data, some of the taxes, you get into some of the visitor intelligence data. If we can get into the booking windows, demographic studies, just media attribution, understanding visitor trends into different regions from different origin markets, timing, things like that. All that kind of rolls up into this one dashboard that then those super regions and those local partners have that's unique to them. And it's been fantastic because it's not always we got to provide that value. And there's a lot of times we're asking our local partners or regional, like, what are you hearing? Tell us, what are you hearing on the ground? And that's a lot, that can be a lot. So maybe we don't always get the feedback that we're looking for, but when we're contributing and they're contributing, and then we're seeing this really nice dashboard that has all of it, I think it validates the importance of that feedback and that two-way street. And that's really helped us keep a better finger on the pulse of what's happening locally and regionally, and provide those partners more more resources, and gives us just better insight at a state level.
So you've, as a state, you guys have been paying attention to geolocation data for a long time, working with Arrivalist and now, working within Madden Voyage. And one of the things that you had pointed out and noticed was that, some parts of your state are more dependent on that regional traveler. So Northern Idaho sees a lot more travel from Washington, and it's 70 some odd percent, I think is what you said. Compared to, say, down towards Yellowstone country, where it's much more broad. And so I'm curious, how does that factor into the way that you communicate to those partners when you're talking about marketing strategy, and you're saying, look, we've got to broaden the base of strategy. We need to broaden the base of visitation to Northern Idaho so that we're not so dependent on just a regional traveler from Washington State. How does that work? And how does the metrics change? Do you use this data to sort of change the metrics that are being paid attention to for those types of campaign ideas and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, we've joked about it, but I blame you. I remember Esto in 2015 in Portland. You were on a panel and you were talking about what you were doing when you were with Fort Worth and Arrivalist, and we said we've got to go back and do the same thing. And so, you've been there from the beginning in terms of influencing our decisions there. But yeah, it's many states. I'm sure there are probably some states that are maybe a little bit more homogenous in terms of their destinations, but many states, we've all got those geographic differences. And I think what it does is, as we can provide some analysis of origin market or behavior changes. I think it just makes people maybe a little bit more confident to try something new or to take a risk. We've seen, you talk about Northern Idaho, we've seen Coeur d'Alene just really explode, and where they've been, as you've mentioned, very dependent on Washington, which makes a ton of sense, 3 hours from Seattle, right there at the border. But they've really turned into a national destination over the last couple of years. And so now you start to see their CVB and some of their teams running more national digital campaigns. And that's been really exciting to see. And so it may be, I think there's maybe some trepidation to try something new or really think bigger when you just kind of know what your bread and butter is and what it's been for a long time. A lot of this data in terms of media attribution, or being able to show, God, we're getting a ton of activity from New York or Chicago or Atlanta, and then you start looking at, hey, we've got some new direct flights in there, or we've got some of these, Texas. I mean, we love Texas, man. We've got Houston and Dallas have been some new direct flights into Boise and Spokane that have fueled a ton of activity for us. And Boise's going to get a new direct flight with Austin here soon. And so, that's been huge for us. And I think a lot of those, without some of this data and being able to show, some of the year-over-year percentage growth, that, folks maybe would be a little more reticent to take a chance and build a campaign or a program around some of those things. Whereas you can back it up with some numbers, maybe still a bit of a risk, but let's go for it, because the numbers are showing us that there's a potential positive direction.
That's great. And I know we're running short on time here, and we did have one question from Adam, and his question was, what tools are you currently using to monitor and analyze traveler sentiment about your destination from key source markets? And were there any limitations with these tools or questions that remain unanswered? So I don't know that you guys are currently doing any traveler sentiment work, but is it on your radar? And is there any, what are your thoughts on that? On traveler sentiment as a part of your destination intelligence toolkit? Matt, I'll let you go first.
I don't know that we're not necessarily using anything like within our Voyage platform or anything like on a regular basis. I'm sure, I know we've looked at some different social sentiment. We do utilize some tools there. We have from time to time. Wouldn't say it's a part of like our real regular, toolkit though. We've done some surveying, visitor sentiment surveying. That's worked out well. It's been a few years since we have. Part of me is always a little bit skeptical of what people say in a survey versus what their behavior. And so when we can look at some of these data sources and your behavior tells us what we're doing. Where the money is going. That tells us what your sentiment is. And so. And I think people respond a little bit differently on surveys. Maybe that could be slightly misleading. So I think it's important. I certainly wouldn't dismiss it, but it's probably not the top priority for us necessarily right now.
I think we use right now. It's something, Matt, on my list to figure out how do we do that as we continue to do campaigns with Madden Media. But we use our PR software. Meltwater has a very limited, but does give us some travel sentiments there. So we utilize that, and we've just switched over that in the last year or two. I think we're 2 or 3 years into it. So we utilize that to an extent, knowing that we do need to go a little bit further into it, more so to find out what's going on in the next probably 6 months to a year. But I think after that, I think, like Matt said, it's not at the top of our list because we think we can get some of the other data that we have and make just good decisions with it. But we also do know that for the next year and a half, things are changing. And for us, since we are a business destination and a leisure destination, I think our travel sentiments kind of are very different. So we probably need to look at how we're making that work and continuing to help support that.
I'll just add on, we used the national stuff that was coming out from Amir, and everybody was phenomenal when we were in the throes of the pandemic, and just knowing which direction to look up or sideways or down, or is there any hope at all, and that gave us the glimmer of, okay, we can do that. So I think it is going to be a fabric of the rest of our lives as to how we do business, how we forecast, how we're really doing that. And we know that window of folks actually making your decision to travel is, now more than ever, just, is it sunny today? Great, let's go to Port Aransas.
Well, thank you so much, Kayleen, Brett, and Matt, for sharing your thoughts on all of these topics and answering so many questions from me today. And I know we're at time, so if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to shoot those, now if you'd like, and we'll be happy. I'll make sure that those get to the panelists, and we'll get back to you through email. But thank you so much. Thank you to Will and the eTourism team for setting up today's webinar. Thank you to our panelists for being available today to go through all of this. It's a huge topic. We have about 8 or 9 more questions here that, we could use another hour or two to go through. But thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a great rest of your week. And hopefully we'll see each other in person soon in Las Vegas.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.